Okay, Eric Severson, bring us home here. Thanks so much for being willing. I guess I didn't ask you to be the last person. I just thought you'd be a good person to conclude the conference with.
Okay.
And
You didn't just shuffle the deck. You picked me and stuck me at the very end.
that's right. Because I've got a preacher in me. You got to end strong here. So,
Yeah. How are you holding up, Tom?
I'm doing all right. I've really enjoyed the conversations. Like people are just wise, vulnerable. Yeah, it's been rich.
But you've utilized what has been a career full of incredible energy for gathering people and hosting conversations. And you're a force, and you've used it for good in this case. So thank you so much for hosting this event and for inviting us all to be together and for including me.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Eric. I appreciate that. Um, there's strength in numbers. So, yeah. Well, you want to talk about how you think we, at least typical Christians, have got things mixed around. What do you have in mind?
It was a Wesleyan Theological Society conference about 10 years ago or so. And I was sitting with a friend of mine, Nathan Kerr, and he was given a paper on the church, or against the church, I guess would be better to say it. And we had a little bet going that, and I suggested that he include this phrase ecclesiectomy in his paper.
Okay.
The idea that I had in mind, and it sort of dovetailed with what Nate was doing, was the tendency to turn the church into a thing, and then to begin to police its boundaries and determine like who belongs as part of this thing, this object, this noun. And so he did include ecclesiectomy in his paper that day, and so I owe him, like beers for life or something. I can't remember exactly what the prize was on that bet.
I bet he remembers.
Yeah, I bet he does. The word ecclesia, it's gathering, right? It's the coming together. It's the coming together of those summoned. It's an event. It's a taking place. It's a happening. And English loves nouns. We really do. We've got this horrible addiction to nouning things in English. So in addition to nouning living, moving, existing, happening beings in the world, like human is the worst example of all. Like to think of a human as an object is to miss the vast majority of what it means to happen as a human being, to be there. Their being as a human is this just active, vibrant happening. But when you think of the church as a thing, you've already lost, I think, what ecclesia means. It's not that it isn't just like a place, like a structure, which people have been telling me my whole life. Of course, the church isn't a thing, but the concept of normalcy, and I focused my chapter a little bit on the concept of normalcy as the establishment of what and who belongs in a thing called the church. If the church is an event, wherever two or more are gathered, where things are happening, then the question is like, what kind of happenings are church happenings or ecclesial happenings of summonings? And I spent most of what I wrote in the chapter talking about how normal is almost always in the way, whatever that word comes to mean, heteronormal certainly, but lots of other normals that come to establish and name the type of happening that counts as church. And so I think it just seems so very obvious to me, like I'm not even saying something controversial, to name that church as an event, and that it is a queer event. It's an event of the abnormal, of that which defies and erupts and destabilizes all of the political principalities and powers that come together around the concept of what counts as normal, as acceptable, or as okay. So I think I exerted that energy in the little short chapter that I wrote for this book, is just to try to point to the aspects of the ministry of Jesus and the establishment of the event of the church long ago. And every time it happens, that people in the margins are gathered together in the hope and love and name of Jesus. That's church. That's the happening, the event. That's ecclesiology. So it's not that I really wanted an ecclesiectomy, like no, like all church removed. It's the carving out of the thingness so that an event can take place. And it's an event of the margins, which is the coolest thing about the word queer. Like can't get more into the farther you go into the margins where people are shoved away from where normal lives, the closer you get to Jesus or to the event, the happening of ecclesia. And so that's kind of where I focused it. And then I made the little dig on the title of the book, which was, it's just a gentle dig to say the real question here really isn't like the Church of the Nazarene should be affirming and accepting of LGBTQIA plus folks. It's like the church is happening wherever people like Keegan are hanging out and meeting in love and hope and grace and constellated around the event of loving one another through Christ. That's church. So the real question is, do people who like to call themselves Nazarene have an interest in being a part of the event that is church? So that's kind of the focus of my piece.
That's such a different way of thinking, though, right? I mean, that's kind of your point. I mean, what many people will say is the culture is this way, and the culture has queer people in it, and that's bad. We need to be called out, be separate. We need to do, even if they want to use the word event, we want to do our event over here. But it sounds to me like you're saying if queerness is quote, in the culture, and that's where the church needs to be in some sense. Would you say it that way, or how would you say it?
No, I don't think I would want to say, I don't know that I would want to say that about culture. I don't know, Tom, what I think about culture.
Okay. It's definitely difficult.
Yeah. And I wouldn't think so. Queerness. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a queer person. I just think the queering is awesome. And it's the great hope of people who might be gravitating towards normal over and over again as power makes its way into the center of what gets called church. And so like the hope of the church is people who are as listening and attending to the marginalized, and then taking our cues in terms of following the leadership of those who are in this culture or this world as we live in it today, are ecclesiaing, are the happening of the church. So I don't know really how to answer you about queer as part of the culture, whatever. Like that makes me kind of hopeful for culture. If really what is happening but I don't know. I really don't have a strong opinion about how to speak of culture.
Yeah, I get you. I don't know, quite sure what I think either, but maybe I'm trying to say something like this. If the spirit of love seems to be on the move in places in which people don't even necessarily identify themselves as Christian, we can still say in some sense, I don't know if church is the right word, but there's something, that's where the church ought to be eventing, is where this is happening. What do you think about that terminology?
Yeah, that sounds good, Tom. That's good. That's one of the best things I've ever heard you say.
I love it, Eric.
That was great, Tom.
Oh, well, time's up. Thanks so much for being willing. Well, I'm saying as if I gave you a choice. Thanks for much being shoved into the last slot of the conference. I really, really appreciate it.